The gunshot echoed across the rugged Montana landscape, sending birds scattering from the pines, as Samantha Novak froze in her tracks, clutching the basket of fresh-picked wildflowers to her chest. Through the morning haze, she spotted him, a lone figure slumped in his saddle, blood seeping through his shirt, his horse nervously pawing at the dirt road leading to her father's homestead. It was 1885, and the Montana Territory was still wild enough that the sight of an injured stranger should have sent her running for the safety of her father's rifle. Instead, Samantha found herself rushing forward as the man's grip on his saddle horn loosened, and he tumbled to the ground with a painful groan. "Sir, are you all right?" she called, dropping to her knees beside him as his palomino snorted and backed away. The man was handsome despite the grime and blood-dark hair falling over a strong brow, stubble darkening a sharp jawline. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, though finer dressed than most she'd encountered. "I'm fine," he managed, clearly not fine at all, a crimson stain spreading across his left side. "Just need a moment." "You've been shot," Samantha stated plainly, already tearing strips from her petticoat to form a makeshift bandage. "Who did this to you?" His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, met hers with suspicion. "No one you want to know, miss. Best you forget you saw me." "That's ridiculous," she replied, pressing the cloth firmly against his wound, causing him to wince. "I'm Samantha Novak. My father's homestead is just over that ridge. We need to get you there before you bleed to death." "Matthew Tucker," he offered reluctantly, "and I can't stay. They'll follow the blood trail." He tried to rise, only to fall back with a pained curse. "Who's following you?" Samantha glanced nervously down the road before whistling softly to his horse, which approached with wary steps. "Never mind that now. First, we need to get you mounted." "Miss Novak." "Samantha," she corrected, already positioning herself to help him stand. "And I don't particularly care what kind of trouble you're in, Mr. Tucker. I won't leave a man to die in the dirt." With considerable effort, she helped Matthew to his feet, supporting his weight against her side. The horse snorted nervously as they approached. "Steady, Copper," Matthew murmured to the animal. Together they managed to get him upright, where he swayed dangerously, one hand clutching his wounded side. Samantha placed her hands on his waist, bracing him as he grabbed the saddle horn. "On three," she instructed. "1, 2, 3. With a grunt of pain, Matthew pulled himself halfway onto the saddle. Samantha pushed upward with all her strength, her hands firmly against his back until he was seated, breathing heavily from the exertion. Matthew looked down at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "You should have stayed away," he warned, his voice rough with pain. Samantha's chin lifted defiantly as she grabbed Copper's reins, preparing to lead them to safety. "You should have asked me to." Their eyes locked for a charged moment before Matthew's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "I reckon we're both stubborn then." "So it seems," she replied, starting toward her home with a determined stride. "My father and brother are away in town until tomorrow, but I can tend that wound well enough." The trip to the Novak homestead was slow and painful for Matthew. By the time they reached the modest two-story house, his face had paled alarmingly, and Samantha feared he might fall from the saddle at any moment. "Just a little further," she encouraged as she led his horse to the small barn behind the house. "We'll get you inside and tend to that wound properly." "Your father won't take kindly to a strange man in his house," Matthew managed between labored breaths. "My father raised me to help those in need," Samantha replied firmly. "Now can you dismount, or shall I help you?" With her assistance, Matthew slid from the saddle, leaning heavily against her as they made their way to the house. Inside, Samantha cleared off the kitchen table with one sweep of her arm, sending her morning sewing project tumbling to the floor. "Lie down," she instructed, already gathering supplies from various cabinets. "The floor would do," Matthew protested weakly, eyeing the clean tablecloth with concern. "Don't be ridiculous," Samantha said, returning with a basin of water, clean cloths, and her father's whiskey. "I need to see that wound clearly, and I can't do that with you on the floor." With considerable effort, Matthew managed to hoist himself onto the table, lying back with a pained groan. Samantha cut away his bloodied shirt with steady hands, revealing a nasty bullet wound on his left side. "Looks like it passed through," she observed, cleaning around the wound. "You're lucky." "Don't feel particularly lucky," Matthew replied through gritted teeth as she applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "Lucky it wasn't a few inches to the right," Samantha clarified. "Or we wouldn't be having this conversation." She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound thoroughly before stitching it closed with practiced movements. Her mother had taught her well before consumption had taken her 3 years prior, and Samantha had become the homestead's de facto healer since then. Matthew watched her work with curious eyes. "You've done this before." "Too many times," she confirmed, tying off the last stitch. "Life out here doesn't leave much room for squeamishness." "Most women would have fainted at the sight of all this blood," he observed. Samantha met his gaze steadily. "I'm not most women, Mr. Tucker." "I'm beginning to see that," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed as exhaustion overtook him. For the next 2 days, Samantha tended to Matthew as he drifted in and out of consciousness, fighting a fever that threatened to undo all her careful work. She bathed his brow with cool cloths, changed his bandages, and coaxed broth between his lips during his lucid moments. On the evening of the second day, Samantha's father and brother returned from town to find a strange man in their home. Samuel Novak's weathered face darkened with anger as his son Marcus reached instinctively for his gun. "Before you say anything," Samantha began, stepping between her family and Matthew's sleeping form, "he was shot. I couldn't leave him to die. You brought a gunshot stranger into our home." Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. "Have you lost your mind, girl? He could be an outlaw, or he could be an innocent man," Samantha countered. "He hasn't told me what happened, but I wasn't about to condemn him without knowing." Marcus, 2 years older than Samantha's 20 years, peered at the sleeping man. "I've seen him before, Pa. He works at the Thompson Ranch over in Cedar Valley. Foreman, I think." Some of the tension eased from Samuel's shoulders. The Thompson Ranch was one of the largest and most respected in the territory. "That still doesn't explain the bullet hole," Samuel pointed out, though his voice had softened somewhat. "I intend to find out when he's well enough to tell us," Samantha replied. "For now, he needs rest." Samuel studied his daughter's determined face and sighed. "Your mother was just as stubborn about helping strays. Very well, but he stays in the barn once he's strong enough to move." Matthew awoke fully the next morning to find Samantha checking his bandages. His fever had broken during the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. "You're still here," he observed, his voice rough from disuse. "It's my house," she reminded him with a small smile. "Where else would I be, I meant." Matthew grimaced as he tried to sit up. "Most people would have turned me in by now." "Turned you in?" Samantha helped him into a sitting position. "For what crime, Mr. Tucker?" Matthew hesitated, studying her face. "I didn't steal those horses," he finally said. "I was trying to recover them." "What horses?" "The ones Blackwell's gang took from the Thompson Ranch," Matthew explained. "I tracked them to their camp, but they spotted me before I could get the horses out. Got this for my trouble." He gestured to his side. "Jed Blackwell." Samantha's eyes widened. The notorious horse thief had been terrorizing the territory for months. Matthew nodded grimly. He's planning to move them across the border into Canada tomorrow. I was the only one who knew where their camp was, and now—" He made a frustrated gesture. "Thompson will lose half his breeding stock." "My father and brother returned last night," Samantha told him. "They could help." Matthew shook his head. "I can't ask civilians to go up against Blackwell's gang. You're hardly in any condition to do it yourself," Samantha pointed out reasonably. "And my father and Marcus are excellent shots." "It's too dangerous," Matthew insisted, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "I need to get back to the ranch and gather the men." "The ranch is 20 miles away. You'll reopen your wound before you make it halfway," Samantha protested, placing a restraining hand on his shoulder. Their argument was interrupted by Samuel's entrance. The older man regarded Matthew with cautious eyes. "So you're awake," he observed. "My daughter says you work for Thompson." "Yes, sir. I'm his foreman," Matthew confirmed, straightening despite his pain. "And I'm deeply grateful for your hospitality, but I need to be on my way." "To catch Blackwell?" Samuel asked, surprising both of them. "Marcus and I overheard some talk in town. Blackwell hit 3 ranches in the last month. Thompson's was the latest." "Yes, sir." "I tracked them to their camp in Falcon Canyon," Matthew said. "They're moving the horses tomorrow." Samuel and Samantha exchanged a look. "That's less than 10 miles from here," Samuel noted, "closer than the Thompson Ranch." "I need to warn them," Matthew began. "What you need is to rest that wound," Samuel interrupted. "Marcus has already gone to fetch Sheriff Miller and a few men from town. We can guide them to the canyon." Matthew stared at the older man in surprise. "Sir, I can't ask you to get involved in this." "You didn't ask," Samuel pointed out gruffly. "And Blackwell's men killed my friend Ben Peterson last month when they took his horses. I've got my own reasons for wanting to see them stopped." While the men prepared for their confrontation with Blackwell's gang, Samantha helped Matthew back to full strength. By evening, he was able to stand and walk short distances, though she insisted he remain at the homestead when Samuel and the sheriff's posse departed. "I should be with them," Matthew fretted, watching from the porch as the men rode away. "You'd only slow them down," Samantha said bluntly, handing him a cup of coffee. "Besides, someone needs to stay and protect me if things go wrong." Matthew gave her a wry look. "Somehow I doubt you need much protecting, Miss Novak." "Perhaps not," she admitted with a small smile, "but I thought it might make you feel more useful." As night fell, they sat together on the porch, the tension of waiting making conversation difficult. Finally, Matthew broke the silence. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "You could have just ridden for the sheriff when you found me." Samantha considered his question. "My mother always said that kindness is never wasted, even on strangers," she replied. "Besides, you have honest eyes. Honest eyes." Matthew repeated, amusement creeping into his voice. "Yes," Samantha said firmly. "I've always been able to read people. It's a gift." "And what do my honest eyes tell you about me?" he asked, suddenly serious. Samantha turned to face him, studying him openly. "That you're a man who values honor above comfort. That you're loyal to those who earn your trust. That you're carrying some old pain you don't speak of." She paused. "And that you're wondering if it would be inappropriate to kiss me right now." Matthew's eyes widened in surprise before he let out a startled laugh. "Either your gift is remarkable, or I'm more transparent than I thought." "Perhaps both," Samantha suggested with a smile. Their gazes held for a long moment before Matthew reluctantly looked away. "Your father has shown me trust I haven't earned. I won't repay that by taking liberties with his daughter." "Very honorable," Samantha noted, a hint of disappointment in her voice, "though perhaps a bit presumptuous to assume I'd allow such liberties to be taken." Matthew smiled despite himself. "You're unlike any woman I've ever met. Samantha Novak." "I'll take that as a compliment, Matthew Tucker," she replied. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Both tensed until they recognized Samuel and Marcus among the returning riders. With them were Sheriff Miller and several Thompson Ranch hands and a string of recovered horses. "You got them," Matthew exclaimed, rising carefully to his feet. "Caught them by surprise," Samuel confirmed as he dismounted. "Blackwell and 2 of his men are in custody, the rest scattered." The next day, James Thompson himself arrived at the Novak homestead to collect his horses and his foreman. A burly man with a silver-streaked beard, Thompson listened gravely as Matthew recounted his discovery of Blackwell's camp and his subsequent injury. "You took a bullet trying to recover my property," Thompson said when Matthew had finished. "I won't forget that loyalty." "Just doing my job, sir," Matthew replied. Thompson turned to the Novak family. "And I won't forget the kindness you've shown Matthew. You'll always find friends at the Thompson Ranch." As the recovered horses were prepared for the journey back to the ranch, Matthew found himself reluctant to leave. He sought out Samantha, finding her in the garden behind the house. "I'll be leaving soon," he said, watching as she gathered vegetables for the evening meal. "I assumed as much," she replied, not looking up from her task. "Your employer seems eager to have you back." "He's a good man," Matthew said. "I've worked for him for 5 years now." "Then you should return to your position," Samantha said reasonably, finally meeting his gaze. "Your wound is healing well. You should be able to resume light duties in a week or so." "Samantha," Matthew began, then faltered. "Yes," she prompted, setting down her basket. "I'd like to call on you," he said finally. "Properly, I mean, with your father's permission." A slow smile spread across Samantha's face. "I'd like that very much, Matthew." "It's a 30-mile round trip," he warned. "I might not be able to come more than once a week." "Then we'll make those visits count," she replied simply. True to his word, Matthew began calling on Samantha every Sunday after church. They would share dinner with her family, then walk the boundaries of the Novak property, talking about everything and nothing. Matthew spoke of growing up as a ranch hand son in Texas, of losing both parents to a fever when he was 16, of working his way up from stable boy to foreman at the Thompson Ranch. Samantha told him of her mother's illness, of learning to manage a household at 17, of her dreams to someday become a proper nurse. As summer turned to autumn, their feelings deepened. Samuel watched with cautious approval as the young foreman courted his daughter with respectful determination. By the first snowfall, Matthew had saved enough to place a down payment on a small parcel of land adjoining the Thompson Ranch. "It's not much," he told Samantha as they stood on the wind-swept hilltop overlooking his new property. "Just 40 acres, but the soil's good and there's a spring for water. I could build a house by spring." "It sounds perfect," Samantha said, her cheeks pink from the cold. Matthew took her gloved hands in his. "I'm not asking yet," he clarified. "Not officially. I want to have something more than promises to offer you, but I wanted you to know my intentions." Samantha squeezed his hands. "I've known your intentions since the day you asked to call on me, Matthew Tucker. And mine haven't changed since the day I helped you back onto your horse." The winter was harsh, with blizzards that made travel between the Thompson Ranch and the Novak homestead impossible for weeks at a time. During those separations, Matthew worked on plans for his house, while Samantha prepared for her future, sewing linens and learning new recipes from the neighboring women. By early spring, the foundation for Matthew's house had been laid, and the framework began to rise against the Montana sky. Thompson, pleased with his foreman's initiative, allowed Matthew time to work on his home between ranch duties and even contributed lumber from his own sawmill. When the house was finally complete in late spring, Matthew rode to the Novak homestead with a nervous heart. He found Samuel splitting wood behind the house and approached with determined steps. "Mr. Novak," he began formally, "I'd like to speak with you about Samantha." Samuel set down his axe and regarded the younger man steadily. "I've been expecting this conversation, Tucker." "I love your daughter, sir," Matthew stated plainly. "I've built a good home for her. It's small, but I have plans to expand it as my herd grows. I can provide for her properly now, and I swear to you I'll spend my life making her happy." "And if I say no?" Samuel asked, though there was no real opposition in his tone. "Then I'll work harder, save more, and ask again," Matthew replied without hesitation. "But I hope you'll say yes, because we both know Samantha will marry who she chooses, with or without permission, and I'd rather have your blessing." Samuel's weathered face broke into a reluctant smile. "You understand my daughter well." He extended his hand. "You have my blessing, Tucker, but you'd best ask her quickly before she decides to propose to you herself." Matthew found Samantha in the kitchen, humming softly as she kneaded bread dough. For a moment, he simply watched her, imagining her in their own kitchen in the home he'd built with his own hands. "Are you going to stand there all day?" she asked without turning around. "How did you know I was here?" Matthew asked, stepping into the room. "I always know when you're near," she replied simply, turning to face him with flour-dusted hands. "It's part of my gift." Matthew crossed to her, taking her hands despite the flour. "I've just spoken with your father," he said, his heart pounding. "And?" Samantha prompted, though her eyes told him she already knew what he was about to say. "And he's given us his blessing," Matthew confirmed. "But the final answer must come from you." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Samantha Novak, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her smile radiant. 1,000 times yes. They were married in the small church in Cedar Valley on a perfect June day. The entire Thompson ranch turned out for the celebration, along with neighbors from miles around. As they drove away from the church in a wagon festooned with ribbons and wildflowers, heading toward their new home, Samantha leaned against Matthew's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" she asked. "That you should have stayed away," Matthew recalled with a rueful smile. "And I said that I should have asked you to," he finished. "I've never been so glad to lose an argument." "Get used to it, Matthew Tucker," she teased, her eyes bright with happiness. "You married a Novak woman. We're notoriously stubborn." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead as they rode toward their future together. The years were kind to the Tuckers. Their small ranch prospered as Matthew's careful management allowed them to expand their holdings. Samantha's dream of becoming a nurse was realized in an unexpected way, as she became known throughout the region for her healing skills, attending births and treating injuries when the town doctor couldn't be reached. Their first child, a daughter they named Maria after Matthew's mother, arrived a year after their marriage. She was followed by 2 sons, Samuel and Joseph, who grew up strong and capable under their parents' loving guidance. By 1905, the wild Montana territory of their youth had become the settled state of Montana. Cedar Valley had grown into a proper town with a railroad station and electric lights on Main Street. The Tuckers' 40 acres had expanded to over 400, and their modest house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family. On their 20th anniversary, Matthew surprised Samantha with a trip to San Francisco, something she had always dreamed of seeing. As they stood on the deck of the ferry approaching the magnificent city, Matthew slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "Happy?" he asked, watching her face as she took in the sight before them. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. Do you ever think about that day, when I found you on the road? Only every day, Matthew admitted. I was so certain I was going to die there. Then this stubborn angel appeared and refused to let me. Samantha laughed softly. I wasn't being entirely selfless, you know. I took one look at you and decided I couldn't let such a handsome man die before I'd had a chance to properly meet him. Is that so? Matthew raised an eyebrow. You never told me that before. A woman has to maintain some mystery, Matthew, she replied with a mischievous smile. Even after 20 years of marriage. As they disembarked in San Francisco, beginning their adventure in the great city by the bay, Matthew reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a bullet wound on a dusty Montana road to a life richer and fuller than he had ever dared to hope for. All because a brave young woman had helped a wounded cowboy back onto his horse and refused to stay away when he told her to. Looking at Samantha's face, still beautiful after all these years, Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his days thanking whatever fate or providence had placed him in her path that fateful morning. And as she turned to him, her eyes reflecting the same love and certainty he felt, he knew she was thinking the exact same thing.